Here we have a problem by Nadareishvilli. I hope I pronounced that at least somewhat correctly. And with that, welcome to the most beautiful problems of all time. Here we see a rather curious position, as if we were playing 3x8 chess or something, but that's not the case. The other squares will also become important in this study. But first, let's take a look at how things stand here, or actually no. Feel free to pause the video to try and find the solution yourself. You had the chance to pause the video, and now let's go through it ourselves. Let's take stock of the situation. This king has no squares to move to. Likewise, these three pawns can't move at the moment because, well, black also has this diamond pattern here, which is immobile. The only pawns that can move here are these three, and with these three pawns, we now have to somehow checkmate this king. It sounds a bit odd at first, but it actually works. Let's get started. So, just a quick note. If we play h7 here, then this will turn into a dreary game. The king can simply capture all the pawns here. But that's not a big deal, because we still have a guaranteed draw with white. But we can actually play better here, and with white we can play for a win. And if it's not h7, then it has to be f6. Black has a few options to choose from here. Let's go through them one by one. So if king f7 comes, then we play h7. And yes, now we can't really get to this pawn here. Black would have to capture, and white gets a queen. And I'll give you this much in advance. If white gets a queen here, then it's 1. It's not entirely trivial, but it's 1. That's why we'll first look at the more ambitious attempt here. So king f8 would also lead to an easy queen promotion after h7. That's why the most ambitious attempt here is h8. Then f7 also comes, and after king h7, now f8 to queen doesn't work, because then we suddenly stalemate black. That means we can't just promote to a queen with white here. We have to be a bit smarter and say, let's promote to a rook here, because then black can still capture this pawn. With the rook, we can protect our pawn. And you might think, black is completely immobilized here, and we have a rook and a pawn. So where's the difficulty now? It's still coming, so it's really not trivial what you have to do here next. King h7, and right, it continues. Now, so to speak, it's our move. We have to try to promote this pawn somehow, and we do that by advancing accordingly. And in this position, we can play rook to h5. And black finally has to give up any ambitions of stopping this pawn. And while he can play king to h8 here, after h7 he would have to run away. The pawn goes through, it's just not good for the black player here. And even after king to g8, you might think he settles in here, but of course we have waiting moves with the rook, and we would still be able to promote to a queen. That's why black abandons the plan of trying to stop this pawn. Here we can push through with h7, black takes the rook, and white gets the queen. And now the real fun begins. Now you have to come up with a winning plan. How can we checkmate this king with just a single queen in the end? Or rather, how can we here activate our resources that we've kept so well hidden here? Let's continue for now. So the king is in check and will have to move somewhere. And now we have this locked structure. And just to give you an idea of what would need to happen, we could capture here with the queen, then this pawn would capture, and then we'd have a passed pawn here that could try to run through. Okay, let's be honest now. To be specific, it can't actually break through, so maybe we need to do something else first. But let's think about it for a moment. Where does this king actually need to be? Let me remove the marker here. Where does this king need to stand so that if the queen captures here, h3, pawn takes h3 happens, this g4 pawn can actually break through. And for that we can create a square around this pawn here. And if the king is actually inside this particular square, then he is able to stop the pawn from advancing in time. If the king can step into this square with his own move, then he can also stop the pawn. That means that all these squares here ultimately mean that the king could still step into the square in time. So the king must not be standing there either. If we play queen takes h3 here, h3. This means here we have, let me use a different color. I'll go with something a bit fancy. I don't even need green for this. Even though green on green isn't the prettiest, but still. Here are the squares where we need to lure the black king. Then we could play queen takes h3, and our pawn would be able to rush through quickly. So that's the plan. Now, of course, putting it into practice is a bit trickier, so let's just get started. With queen to g7, check. What happens now? The king has to move away, and if we just keep giving checks here, we won't make any progress. We can't really use the queen to force the king exactly where we want him to go. But we can make a waiting move, and after king g5, queen to h8. And we notice, okay, now we've already cut off the king from this h file. He moves to g6, and now it starts to get a bit tricky because we always have to try with the queen. Yes, to basically guide the king around the board so that in the end he ends up down here on one of these squares. He ends up here. So how do we do that? The king moves to h6, we bring our queen closer, and we see the king has only one escape square, which he has to go to. Queen to h5. The king, yes, has several escape squares, and we could go through all of them one by one now, but I'll just do it systematically, trying to guide the king as far away from these lower squares as possible to show the longest route, but also hopefully the most instructive way for white to win here. King to g8, queen to h6, now the king has to move to f7. Queen to h7, check. If the king moves here, then we go to g6. And the black king again has only this one square. If he moves up, check. And we keep shifting the problem further to the side. And here we can just say, hey, I don't really think it's that cool that you keep going to the 8th rank. Why don't you try something else for a change? For example, why don't you go to b7? And now we're leading the king further and further along here. We're really locking him in nicely here, blocking off the squares. Oh, by the way, here he could also move here. But I think I chose b6. Exactly, because I'm trying to lead the king as far away as possible from those dangerous squares a1 to e1. And here, it's really just technique. But I find it impressive how, with this technique, you can guide the king so far that in the end, he's here on b1. And what did we say now when he's on b1 and is sufficiently far enough away from this particular square here? Then we can capture this bishop here. And yes, now that's actually the point. We can afford to make this move once. The king moves, we capture with the queen, and yes, okay, black has to recapture here, otherwise, of course, everything he ever cared about will fall as well. That's why he captures, and g4. And now the square is small enough. The black king can no longer enter it. And the rest should be relatively easy. We promote here, and then I would say we've won the game accordingly. So, we'll probably pick up the pawns here as well. And then we can be quite satisfied that with the queen, king, and, if you like, even with 2 pawns, we'll win the game. So, today was a very technical episode. Did you try to find the solution yourself? If so, you definitely have my respect for that. Or did you just let yourself be guided through it a bit here? Feel free to write it in the comments. And I've linked another study for you here. Go ahead and click on it if you like, and then I'll see you again in the next video.